It's the 4th of June, 1629, 2 hours before dawn. A ship runs onto a coral reef off a coastline that no European map has named yet. More than 300 people are aboard. Almost all of them survive the wreck. That is the problem. The ship was called the Batavia. She belonged to the Dutch East India Company, the VOC, which was at that moment the largest trading corporation on Earth. A private company with its own soldiers, its own courts, and its own gallows. She left the island of Texel in the Netherlands on the 27th of October, 1628. It was her maiden voyage. She was carrying sailors, soldiers, merchants, servants, women, children, and a fortune in silver coin, bound for the city of Batavia in the East Indies, which today is Jakarta. She never got there. In the dark, she struck Morning Reef in the Houtman Abrolhos, a low scatter of coral islands about 80 kilometers off the coast of Western Australia. The lookout saw white water and was told it was moonlight. Around 40 people drowned in the hours that followed, trying to reach land. Everyone else got ashore, and ashore was almost nothing. Flat coral islets barely rising out of the sea. No trees, no streams, no fresh water at all on the island where most of them landed. A place so bare that survivors later measured their lives in the days between rain showers. The largest group came to rest on a small island the survivors would come to call Batavia's graveyard. Today it is known as Beacon Island. Hold 4 people in your mind. Francisco Pelsart, the commander, the senior VOC official aboard, a merchant rather than a sailor, and sick for much of the voyage. Arian Jacobs, the skipper, a capable seaman who despised Pelsart, and who had already been part of an ugly incident on the voyage out. Geronimus Cornelis, the under-merchant, second in the company hierarchy, a bankrupt apothecary from Haarlem who had left the Netherlands in a hurry after his association with the painter Johannes van der Beek, known as Terentius, who was arrested and tortured for heresy. Cornelis was the last man off the wreck. He clung to the breaking ship for days, and floated ashore on a piece of it. And Wiebe Hayes, a common soldier, a private, a man so unimportant that we know almost nothing about his life before this island or after it. Remember him. The first crisis was water. Within days there was no drinkable water on Batavia's graveyard, and people were dying of thirst. So Pelsart and Jacobs took the longboat, with about 47 others, to search the nearby islands and the mainland coast for a spring. They found nothing, and then, rather than return empty-handed to 300 desperate people, they kept going. They sailed an open boat roughly 2,000 kilometers north to Java. 33 days at sea in a vessel with no deck. They reached Batavia on the 7th of July, 1629. It was, by any measure, one of the great feats of open boat navigation in recorded history. It also left everyone behind them under the authority of Geronimus Cornelis. What happens to people when every authority above them disappears? Ask that question in a bar, and you will get the same answer every time. People will say, they turn on each other. It's human nature. Watch what Cornelis actually had to do. He did not simply let things fall apart. He built something. He formed a council. He drew up a written oath of loyalty and had men sign it. He gathered all the weapons and all the salvaged food and controlled who received them. He drew a small inner circle of about a dozen men close to him and gave them status, better rations, and the clothing taken from the dead. And then he began to reduce the population. He started by removing anyone who might resist. About 20 soldiers under the private Wiebe Hayes were put onto rafts and sent to a larger island a few kilometers away with orders to search for water. They were given no boat to return in. Cornelis expected them to die of thirst. He told them to light signal fires if they found water, which was, in his mind, a a promise he would never have to keep. Then the killings began. At first they were disguised. Men were sent to other islets and never came back. A raft capsized. An accident. Then they stopped bothering to disguise them. Over roughly 2 months, at least 110 men, women, and children were killed. The exact number is still argued over by historians, because the surviving record is the VOC's own trial documents, and those documents count what the killers admitted to. Cornelis himself killed almost no one with his own hands. That was the design. He gave orders, others carried them out, and crucially, he made sure that the killing was spread around, so that nearly every man in his circle had blood on him and no route back. That is not chaos. That is administration. By the end of August, Cornelis's group had almost complete control of Batavia's graveyard. But 2 things had gone wrong. The first was that Wiebe Hayes did not die. On the island they were sent to, now called West Wallaby Island, Hayes and his men found shallow wells of drinkable water. They found small marsupials, Tamar wallabies, which they could catch and eat. They found birds and eggs. They had been sent to the only place in the archipelago that could sustain life. They lit their signal fires exactly as instructed. No one came. The second thing that went wrong was that people began escaping. Men and women slipped off Batavia's graveyard on scraps of wreckage and rafts, reached Hayes, and told him what was happening on the other island. And here's where the story turns. Wiebe Hayes had no commission, no orders, no officer above him. Every institution that had ever told him what to do was either dead, 3,000 kilometers away, or actively trying to kill him. He organized his people anyway. His group grew to roughly 47 men and women. They rationed the water. They shared the food. They built shelters and low walls out of the loose limestone slabs lying on the island. 2 of those structures are still standing today, and they are generally considered the oldest surviving European buildings in Australia. They had almost no weapons, so they made them. They took barrel hoops and long nails from salvaged wreckage and beat them flat and lashed them to poles to make crude pikes. And when Cornelis's men came, they held. They held the first attack. They held the second. On the 2nd of September, 1629, Cornelis came to them himself, with a small party, carrying an offer of terms and, according to the trial records, poisoned wine. Hayes took him prisoner and held him. Command of the mutineers passed to a soldier named Wouter Loos, who understood the one thing Cornelis had underestimated. He brought muskets. That attack nearly broke Hayes's line. Men were wounded. The pikes were no answer to firearms. And in the middle of that fight, on the 17th of September, a sail appeared on the horizon. It was the Sardom. Pelsert had come back. What followed was a race. Both sides understood that whoever reached the ship first would define the story, and the other side would be hanged. Hayes got there first. He rowed out, unarmed and half-starved, and told Francisco Pelsart that the mutineers were coming behind him in a boat and were armed. Pelsart met them with cannon. Now, sit with what this story is usually used for. The Batavia is told as a parable about what people become when civilization is removed. Strip away the rules, the argument goes, and you find the animal underneath. It is the same argument people make with the Stanford prison study, or with the novel Lord of the Flies. But look at what actually happened on that reef. The atrocity did not happen because rules vanished. It happened because a rank in a corporate hierarchy still meant something. Cornelis's entire power came from a company title, on an island where the company was nowhere. He had to hold a council. He had to write an oath. He had to control the stores, allocate the weapons, distribute the guilt. Cruelty on that scale was not the absence of organization. It was a project. It required paperwork. And on the other island, the thing that grew up in the true absence of authority, under a private soldier with no standing at all, was a functioning community that dug wells, built walls, fed strangers, took in refugees, and killed no one. It did not have to. Both islands were the same species, same ship, same week. The difference was not human nature. The difference was who was permitted to give orders. The end of it was hard and quick. Trials were held on the islands themselves. Cornelis and 6 others had their hands cut off and were hanged on Seals Island in early October 1629. Others were taken to Batavia and executed there. Pelzart was held partly responsible for the loss of the ship, and his property was seized. He died about a year later. 2 of the youngest mutineers, Wouterloos and Jan Pelgrom de Baai, were not executed. In November 1629, they were put ashore on the Australian mainland near the mouth of the Murchison River with a small boat and trade goods, and left there. They were the first Europeans known to have lived on the Australian continent. Nobody ever heard from them again. Wiebe Hayes was promoted to sergeant, and his men were paid. Then he disappears from the record entirely. We do not know when he died, or where, or whether anyone at his funeral knew what he had done. The wreck of the Batavia was found again in 1963 and raised by the Western Australian Museum. Part of her hull is on display in Fremantle. Archaeologists are still recovering the remains of the murdered from the sand on Beacon Island, and the stone walls on West Wallaby are still there. Built out of loose rock, without mortar, by people nobody thought were important, who were expected to die of thirst. So, it's the 4th of June, 1629, and it's 2 hours before dawn, and you are on a ship that is coming apart on a reef in the dark. Here is the thing you now know that the passengers didn't. You are going to survive this. Nearly everyone will. The reef is not what kills people here. What kills people here is what gets rebuilt on the beach in the morning, and whether you sign it. You would like to believe you would have walked toward the other island, toward the soldier with the nail on the stick, the one with no rank, no authority, and nothing to offer you but water and work. Most of them didn't. They stayed where the food was, and where the man in charge had the paperwork.